the acknowledgement, and I just want to echo that. I always make sure I have them prepared, but I wanted to make sure I echo that as well. And I also want to point out my mentee is in the room because she's a rock star and the person that I spent some time with over the last year and will probably continue to work with as much as possible. Nikki is in my bottom left corner. She could be somewhere else for all of you. I want to acknowledge her just because it was an awesome experience getting to work with her, continuing to chat semi-regularly depending on everybody's schedules, but I appreciate her for the experience in my first go round of mentorship at Nate, and hope to have many more in the future. And I don't use WebEx very much, so I appreciate the celebration launch or whatever that might be. So what I want to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and tell you a little bit more about how I got here, because I think that it's super non-linear, and I think that that's important. I want to interact as much as I can with as many of you as I can while I'm here today, and definitely invite you to reach out to me directly one-on-one, because I certainly don't have all the roadmaps and paths and that kind of thing with where we're at in our company with my experience in entrepreneurship and business and tech startup world. I do have some answers that are probably more right than wrong. And I also want to see if I can honestly steal any learning that I can from any of you that might help. And that's I think the way that entrepreneurship works best, is when we're all in a friendly way, stealing a little bit from each other as we go, and taking a bit and giving a bit consistently. So I'm assuming if you can celebration conch, you can also hand up or something like that in Cisco. If I don't see the hand up, then feel free to just unmute and go ahead and talk. See Dale now, I don't know if you're doing that because you want to say something or if you're just demonstrating it to me. Okay. Yeah, so feel free. Like I said, if I miss it, just pop in, and I'm happy to go off track at any point. I'm a really good tangent leader and follower. So what I want to speak about today is really modern organizational culture, and the fact that not only in my opinion, but now we're seeing with pretty clear statistically supported and peer-reviewed evidence that we are blowing it. We're blowing it in multiple levels. We're blowing it in terms of how we build it. We're blowing it in terms of how we measure it. We're blowing it in terms of what our priorities are when we talk about culture. And the reality is that culture is just such an extremely complex and ever-changing kind of amorphous blob that nobody actually has a true grasp on. And one of the things that we believe to be true is that anybody who tells you they're a culture expert is a liar, because you can't be a culture expert on all cultures all the time. Cultures change and they adapt day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, depending on the interactions of people in it. As I get into talk more about our tech, I'll be talking about the fact that culture changes based on geographic location. Sometimes we can go really macro with obvious culture changes, but then really subtle ones, like a business meeting that occurs in the UK is going to have different cultural nuances than a business meeting that occurs in Toronto, which might even have significantly different nuances than a business meeting that occurs in Calgary, even though they're in the same country. And so all these nuances mean that it's impossible to be an expert on culture. I'm somebody who subscribes to the belief that it's impossible to be an expert on anything. But B, culture is something that we think we understand much more than we actually do, and that's quite dangerous when we talk about performance, when we talk about being able to build better culture. Anytime somebody thinks they know what they're talking about, I'm going to try really hard not to get political today, because that's going to take us on major tangents, and I don't want to go there. But anytime somebody thinks they know what they're talking about and they don't actually, and they try to lead a culture, that's dangerous. So we're going to talk a little bit about that just as a general concept as well. Here's a little bit of my roadmap. Again, I originally, I actually had on this next slide here, I've got a little bit of a quote, but the quote originally was, "I can't believe you're all here willing to listen to me." Just because every time in entrepreneurship, I'm always just like, wow, people, like, even the first time I just talked to Nikki one-on-one, I was like, I don't know what you're looking to get from me. I hope I can offer you anything. But this is a little bit of the roadmap on where we're going to go, and I'm not going to be, I don't want to I don't want to bore you with a bunch of details that aren't applicable. I still teach, and I was a student not long ago, and an hour is a long time. So the more interaction we can have, the more questions you can ask, that kind of the better. I'm going to resist the urge to take a break in the middle, because even when I teach at MRU, if we have a 50-minute class, I usually give the class a 10-minute break due to attention span research, not supporting this amount of time of constant listening. But given that you only get me once, I'm going to try and cram stuff in and go against my better judgment. So this is a quote that originally said, "I can't believe you're all here to listen to me." But I went with something that's a little more applicable and a little bit more something that embodies what we do at Boost. And that's, don't be a bystander to poor culture. And it's a simple quote that we talk about a lot, especially when we started as a training and consulting company. We were oftentimes in a position where we were essentially being hired and paid a premium to have tough conversations with people. So we went from training and consulting on high performance culture to, at the end of the engagement, people saying, "Hey, if we give you an extra X amount of money on the contract, can you lay this person off or fire them?" And don't get me wrong, at the beginning of our inception as a business owner, you're like, yeah, like for you had a zero or something to the check, and just so that we have some tough conversations on your behalf. Those are really easy things to say yes to, because our biggest thing is cash flow at that time. It's like we needed money. And I learned in particular after that is actually part of being a bystander to poor culture. It's literally allowing somebody to foster an unhealthy culture within their workplace. A really, really effective business model would be to allow that poor culture to continue to exist, so that we continue to be hired back to do the same consulting and training and fire more people for them, and then be hired back, because the culture is never going to get better based on those attitudes. But A, we have souls as a company, and B, we also realized that there's a key aspect of organizational culture that we're missing, and it's that desire to offload it to anybody but those that have the most power to change it. I also, just as I'm watching the chat, so it's funny, the way that this picture gets taken every time I post it or use it, because I know what you think I'm doing here. And in the moment, I'm presenting to a group, so obviously there's a bunch going on in the photo that's been removed. I'm actually presenting to a group, and for some reason in this one moment in this photo, I'm actually talking about thinking. I'm saying, like, think about it. But as has been interpreted here, and I've seen, I don't know why I did it in this particular way, and not just with one finger. I did it with two. But I use it all the time, because I get it leads to a ton of conversation. And honestly, the way that maybe it's being interpreted a little bit here today is something that I've felt a ton sitting in front of leaders who I respect, leaders who have MBAs, leaders who lead companies that are worth far more than mine, and hearing their decision-making processes, how they build culture, how they look at people within their organization. And yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that sentiment in general. For my background, like I mentioned, is a little bit non-linear. So I'm originally from Ontario. The nice thing about presenting online is that you're muted, so I can't hear the boos when I say that. Because when I say that here in Alberta, I definitely get a fair amount of boos. But I've been in Alberta now since 2014. I moved from Ontario to Red Deer. I obviously didn't know anybody in Alberta to warn me about where I was moving, because I really didn't like Red Deer. And this is nothing against Red Deer in general or the people there. It's a me thing. It's not me. It's not them. It's me. It's a me problem. I was in Red Deer for 5 years, and both the institution I was working at the time as a basketball coach and a teacher, and the city just didn't fit. I was there for 5 years and was miserable. I became clinically depressed for a variety of reasons, as anybody knows about mental health. And I was really struggling. I wasn't coaching basketball at the level I wanted to. I was just barely getting by teaching. I was drinking more than I ever had in my life. and I was extremely unhappy. And I couldn't reconcile the fact that every single day I would go to work at a place that showed me images and spoke to me words about how great the culture was. And I'd see posters and we'd have meetings and we'd talk about how we're measuring it and how good it's getting. And my feelings were that I was getting sicker and I was getting less happy, and that the culture, particularly in the areas that I was working in, was actually getting worse. But then I'd see these charts. I'd see this employee engagement data. I'd see student response, and I'd get these amazing student feedback forms that are like, "We love being in your class. It's so amazing. We love the learning environment. We love that you make jokes and sometimes you swear." Stuff like that. It was all this data that was so positive. And then I'd go home alone, and I'd be home and lonely, and nobody was able to help me reconcile the fact that I was miserable, even though the cultures that surrounded me were supposedly so great. And that was data supported. And so after resigning a tenured position at Red Deer at a institution, and moving to Calgary to start this company, and now I love Calgary, and feel much better here. The only thing I can thank Red Deer for that I appreciate every day is that I met my now fiance there. So we just got engaged at Christmas. So I'm getting used to saying the word fiance very, very recently. All those things have led me to creating a company that was like laser focused on answering the question of, why is the culture data lying? Like, why are engagement surveys, is anecdotal interview and focus group data from so many organizations coming back positive, but yet people at and outside of their organizations, we just see anxiety, depression, and other mental illness increasing all the time? If all these huge companies and small companies have such great cultures and people spend 8 hours of their waking time there, about 50% of your awake time, why are people so damn unhappy if the culture is so good? And the answer that we found is simply that it's not, and the collection tools are flawed. So, and I love how engaged you all are in the chat. I'm definitely not used to this, and I'm looking forward to kind of going back through this, but feel free to keep filling it up. So a little bit more about us as a group. Our team, I'm not a technical founder, which is like the number one reason not to invest in a company from most investors, just FYI. I face that every day of like, well, you don't know how to code that well? It's like, well, I'm self-taught how to code and I'm pretty bad at it. I don't say that to investors. That'd be a horrible way to pitch it, but I'm certainly not formally trained. And I spent, I think, like 78 hours over the last week and a half trying to find an error in code that was like a semicolon. And I got to say, like, if anybody in the room's legitimately interested in programming, hats off to you, because I was like, thought my eyeballs were going to fall out of my head looking for the semicolon, which I inevitably found. But our team is awesome. Amrita, our CTO, is a rock star. She's worked with two really, really large companies in North America as a project lead on the tech side. So large that I'm not actually allowed to say their name publicly, and we can't put it on her bio. So she's got NDAs with them because her project involvement was all around creating operating systems in things like electric cars and nuclear power. So she's just great. And she was the person I actually wanted to bring in here today, but she's so shy that this was going to be her debut in public speaking. But she's so shy. She was just not able to wrap her head around doing this just yet, unfortunately. But she's extremely unique. She's an immigrant to Canada. That doesn't make her unique, but the unique part about her is that she's had all this success. She's made all this money working for these big corporations, doing these crazy big projects. And she contacts me and says, I want to be able to create, and I want to be able to have freedom, and I want to be able to design, And I'm like, great, because I can't do any of that stuff without you. So this is going to be a really, really good fit. So her addition to the team has been awesome. Her programming ability, her technical acumen has been huge for us. And the fact that you need to understand too that if you have a non-technical founder, what your CTO hears from that non-technical founder is like, I don't like that this goes here. Can you just make it go here, please? And like maybe in the next like half hour before I present to someone, having no concept of the amount of time that's going to put in for her. Trevor Oseen is a super experienced financial guy, which is also great because I hate spreadsheets. So I look at spreadsheets a lot for culture data that I can get invested in, but when it comes to finances, it just like my eyes kind of glaze over, and he keeps me focused, and he does a rock star job of that. And then Alexis Garcia is I got to be honest, even she's part time with us. I don't know if we'd be here without her. So when I was a sole proprietor and we were just doing a training consulting thing, and we're trying to like build our Instagram presence, and we're battling in all these arenas that really don't actually matter that much. Alexis came on as an unpaid social media intern, and then she became our social media coordinator, made a little bit of cash. Then she graduated from university. I couldn't afford to pay her. She left because she wanted to get paid. Fair. And then we brought her back because we could pay her, and she's great, and she's truly one of the OGs. She's believed in this company the entire way, even when I laid everybody off mid-COVID and said, "Hey guys, we're pivoting to be a tech company." She was the one that was like, "That's so friggin' cool, and I'm so excited to be a part of it." So this is our kind of core team here. We have a couple other people that come in and out. We have some contract work and certainly some developers that are in and out as well. The reason why I believe that it's important to give time every time I talk, like I think that's about 7 to 8 minutes talking about these three members of my team, is that I always get red flagged whenever I listen to a presentation and somebody's not talking about the people that are propping them up. It's great as a founder to be invited to speak at events like this, Lunch Without Lunch, if you've ever heard it for it, in Rainforest, all that kind of stuff. It's like, even if that person comes off super selfless and laid back and down to earth, as a culture person, I'm now kind of red flagged because it's like, you're not doing it alone. Like, you're not even going to mention even maybe you are a sole proprietor and you do the work alone, but you're not going to mention your husband or your wife or your kid. Like, those are cultural red flags for me that come up right away, because we now see oftentimes in our data that when we have leaders who don't regularly share that vulnerability and authenticity about their own lives, the people that have supported them, whether it's professionally or personally, we see less healthy cultures in instances where leaders don't share some of that authenticity and vulnerability. And that's just one of the useful things that our work can kind of point towards us. So I like to share mine just because it's easy for me to say I literally wouldn't be here without them. Now, I want you first to just think about something. And this could be an organization that you have been a part of. You certainly don't have to name it here, and I wouldn't encourage you to slander anybody, or reverse slander, whatever that is. But I want you to think about an organization that you're aware of, that you've been a part of, or something like that, and how you knew it was the best culture. So this could be an institution that you've attended for school. I don't think anybody from NAIT is going to be listening if you say an institution besides NAIT. I don't think you're gonna. I don't think that impacts you. But I do just want you to consider the best organizational culture you've ever experienced or that you're aware of. And then, if you want to just take a second and raise a hand or just unmute and jump in, I want to know how you know that culture was good or that culture was healthy. Yeah, Chris.
So I think I would chime in because I was kind of giving that some deep thoughts as you asked that question, and I think one of the best organizational cultures I was a part of, it was actually quite recently, was I did a group called Pivot on Purpose, which was a case competition. I actually worked with Nikki. She was one of the people that recruited me onto the team. And I think that was just, it was an example of a great culture because I had been going through a different organization where I'd kind of soured on the culture a little bit within the organization. And just to see an organization like that one where people were supportive of one another and we all brought different talents to the team and different ideas to the team. And we were able to work together in a positive and effective way. And we came in third in that competition. It was a national competition. So that would be my example.
Awesome. Yeah, and so I'm going to throw a question back at you then, just right off the bottom of the slide here. How did you know though that that culture was good? So you felt like it was good, but how did you know it was healthier, was stronger, was positive?
I think because I've been looking or I've been listening a lot to different ideas of culture as of late, especially like, you know, your presentation today talking a bit about culture, but other ones as well. And I think having been in the previous organization that I was a part of, which I'm still a part of today, where I've kind of soured on the culture, I've seen issues within the culture, where the culture starts to go wrong, where the culture could improve. And I think I got to see with this one that it was kind of everything that I had been looking for in a culture. It was supportive. It was, you know, we all had I had the ability to be vulnerable within that culture and say, you know, maybe I bit off more than I could chew. I said that at the start of the thing and I was kind of stressing myself out, but I had a team that was supportive that could look at that and say, you know, I think we're all in that position and I think we just kind of have to push through it a little bit more. And definitely just I think the support was something that was very helpful to me. I don't know if that answered your
Awesome.
question.
It totally did. Anybody else? Anybody else have an experience with culture that they were like, I know this is good culture?
Hey Ken, I guess I could talk for 1 second. So when you're like wondering about like what are metrics, like how do you know, like what is the difference between the gut feeling that it's good and like what's something tangible, right? So
Hmm.
thankfully with Chris, like when I've been on the teams like that are working really well, some of the metrics that I look at is like how much engagement is everyone giving? Like, what's the percentage of participation from everyone? Is there someone that's like not talking as much, or does it feel like it's free? So I think that would be something that I'd use as a bit of a metric. Um, the other thing is like how productive are the meetings? Like how much work actually gets done? Because when we're working together well, um, like we actually do the things that are on the agenda, right? And coming prepared. So those could be good metrics. Like have you done the legwork to have good meetings? Like are the expectations there? Have you stayed in the same timelines that you agreed on beforehand? So those are some things that I would say are tangible. That if you can check the boxes and say, yeah, we always do this, we do this, we do this, and then you have the positive feelings together, then that could be a good metric.
Nobody's going to believe that you weren't a plant when you say stuff like that. That I didn't preload you in my discussion portion. So yeah, Nikki and Chris and even here in the chat as I'm just skimming as we answer. We're hearing a lot of different ways that we measure culture anecdotally, right? For ourselves, we do what I would describe as a gap analysis a lot of the time. So Chris described it perfectly. Culture A that I was or am a part of, and I don't love it. And culture B that I was or am a part of, I do love it. Now, what are the differences? Chris mentioned things like feeling like he could express more vulnerability and that there was quite a bit more peer support in the more positive culture. Those engagement levels that Nikki mentioned, how engaged are people? How free are people to engage and share ideas and that sort of thing? In the chat, also seeing things like um, retention rates. So a super common non-anecdotal metric that we see, just retention rates, turnover rates. In tech, we talk about churn a lot, or how much we're losing users. I also see in here like responses in times of need, when you needed them the most. What did that culture do in order to support you? What did they not do in order to support you? Is there a clear respect? Is there learning, understanding encouraged? All these things we generally do a bit of an internal gap analysis on. We have that comparison of what it feels like, and we have that comparison on the good end, and we have it on the bad end, depending on previous situations. Sometimes people don't have that, right? And one of the biggest groups that suffers from not having that ability to do a gap analysis are an immigrant population, where either this is their first job in this country, or they've only had similar jobs in this country, and all they can compare it to is a totally different country's work situation or company situation. And their gap analysis is like, well, this is better than maybe what I came from in many instances, but is the culture actually healthy? Is it actually good for the individual? Does it appeal to the different personalities that are here now? And it's really interesting, and every time I ask a question like this, just because what I perceive as a good culture or a healthy culture is probably slightly different than what many of you might feel. And it might be different a week from now based on new learning or changing climate in the world and the industry, that kind of thing. And all that really lends itself to my earlier point of culture is this amorphous blob where it's so dynamic and it's so unique to individuals and situations that it's really, really hard to nail down whether something's positive or healthy and whether or not it's staying positive or healthy. And when we talk about that gap analysis, instead of just a gap analysis of comparing it to external data points or external experiences, it's so much more useful to be able to develop standards from within and build ourselves up on a model of continuous improvement of wherever our culture currently is. So if our culture is currently at level 1 and everybody feels like it's a healthy culture, why would we not try and get it to level 2 or level 3? And the reality is we will never get it to level 2 or level 3 if our level 1 culture that everybody feels good about is just being compared based on everybody's feelings to other cultures that are worse than us, which is what happens a lot when we talk about the use of digital survey data. So I'll tell you a bit of a horror story before I move on to talk about this next slide. And actually, I'll do a good teacher thing and take that slide off so you're not distracted. We were working to do proof of concept for our technology with a very, very large organization, multinational organization. We were invited to do a major proof of concept on our tech in some flagship locations for them. And I learned 2 things. One, this organization, in spite of the fact that they employ hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, and that their industry is directly connected to how people treat each other, because their client experience is at premium in terms of their profits and their retention of clients and their retention of employees. In spite of all that, they cherry pick their employee engagement data on every single survey. And what I mean by that is, if they get employee engagement surveys or feedback surveys or customer experience surveys, regardless of what they do, they totally cherry pick it. And that cherry picking looks like we got a 90% score from employees in terms of how safe they feel at work. We are going to send all the employees and put all over our social media and all over our website and everything the fact that we got 90% of our employees feel safe when they come to work. And we are not going to talk about these 3 data points that show that 95% of our employees don't feel like they get an adequate opportunity to provide feedback, that they don't feel like they're treated well by their direct reports, those kind of things. To some of you, this won't be a surprise, but it is pretty terrifying when you see it on a scale that big, because when we see big numbers like that in organizations that employ large groups, that's a lot of people that aren't being listened to when they think they are. The potentially more scary thing that we've run into in both this same organization and others is the human desire for self-preservation. So our work demonstrated that a diversity, equity, and inclusion program was actually having the opposite effect on employees. That the program, for various reasons, was actually creating larger divides in both various gender identities and sexualities, as well as race. It was literally like the antithesis to what it was meant to do. And we reported on that. And the person in charge, the vice president of human resources, who had implemented the program, went from being our biggest champion to work with that company to picking us apart and eventually telling us that they weren't going to renew our agreement, which we were more than happy to agree to, because it was what I saw as a highly corrupt practice. So a diversity, equity, and inclusion program that's flawed and actually making problems worse, but because the person who designed it and championed it wants to protect themselves, we're going to ignore it. Luckily for us, that company is publicly traded, so we've been able to track many things such as employee turnover and retention rates because they're public. And since they implemented this program, those retention rates have gone way down. The turnover has gone way up. Sick time has also increased, and the use of benefits packages is starting to max out, because in the U.S. their benefits packages are shockingly not super great. And so we just sent this report back as one of our follow-ups, as you do as a company like us, just to say, hey, remember us when we reported on that thing and we told you it was a bad idea, and now things are going really, really poorly for you? Here's the data that supports that. Have a great day. And the reason why this is really important to understand is that when we think that we're measuring, when we think that we're capturing an amorphous blob-like culture, we know we're capturing negative stuff and we cherry pick it, we can manipulate people on a very, very large scale. We can do it intentionally by cherry picking data, and we can do it unintentionally by, thank you, Carlene. And we can do it unintentionally by just using a tool or creating tools that are flawed. And this is actually the most common. So before I go deeper into what we're talking about when we talk about how you can apply this, how you can be aware of this, how you can recognize this, and maybe even use it in your own businesses or just recognize it in your own lives, just a general idea of what our technology is. So thanks to machine learning and AI and really interesting new methods in robotics, we can measure culture and human experience in totally different ways. Human data collection through digital surveys, in our belief, is going to be a thing of the past because they're super biased. And any of you here have probably filled out at least 10 surveys in the last year. Many of you probably rushed through them, giving all 10s or all 0s, just based on your general opinion of that. Some of you may have felt discriminated against consciously or unconsciously. And what I mean by that is, in our preliminary data collection, ironically done by surveys, to decide if we created this company, we found that the majority of people who are not middle class or higher class than middle white males have low levels of trust in all surveys, which is not shocking because most surveys are created by middle class or higher white males. But what that means is, how many surveys are we relying on for major decision making that are being filled out by women, by people of a variety of sexualities, races, gender identities, immigration status, etc., where they're just flat out lying on the survey because they don't believe that it's truly anonymous, or the questions themselves are biased against the people filling them out. And then we think about that massive scale of people that don't feel that they can trust this data or this data collection tool. And then what we do with that data, and we call that valid and reliable. Because the data collection method has just been seen as the gold standard now for 20, 25 years. And before that, when we did it manually, where we filled out bubble sheets for all surveys, or we answered them by circling numbers on a sheet, 50 years, 75 years. This is a major concern because, yeah, we can look at survey data and say, oh, like this doesn't reflect me. But what's actually happening is that it doesn't reflect most people. And then we make decisions. Who are we going to hire to do this training? Who are we going to bring in, and what problems are we going to address first and foremost? What are our problems? What are our biggest problems? What are our strengths? All those things are often assessed using these methods, and these methods are simply not the best available anymore. So what we've done is we go towards measuring behavior, body language, facial recognition. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later on. And because of that, we take out a lot of the observer bias and other biases that occur. The inability to cherry pick data goes way up. And we're about 45% of the way to being done building it. And we have about 90% of the ability to build it. And what I mean by that is our team, like I said, rock stars, we have Amrita and 2 other people working on the tech side. We're about 45% of the way there because I need $2 million more. So if any of you have that sitting around, feel free. I'm just totally soliciting you right now to just send it my way. And what we do with that, once we have that data, once we have the data that's based on how people act and not how people answer, we can reduce the complacency on culture, which is really happening on really, really high scales right now, where we're collecting data on data. SurveyMonkey makes like $71.3 million a year profit on surveys that are collecting data that, by the way, they get to keep. Not a lot of people are all in on that side of the concept. Like they still have data rights to that. And the collection tool is fundamentally flawed. And the effects that we see come full circle back to what I talked about originally. Yeah, our culture data looks really great. 50% of our staff are depressed. Our sick days are through the roof. Our retention rates are way down. Our turnovers are way up. Why are people accessing benefits way more? Why is our biggest issue in our current negotiation the fact that we want more mental health support? But our culture data looks great. We see it on massive scales and we see it on small scales all the time. One of our current partnerships is actually with a venture capital firm, ironically a firm that doesn't want to invest in us, but does want to recommend us to other startups to help them build their internal culture in their small organization. Venture capital is super fun that way, where it's like, yeah, we don't like you enough to give you money, but we do like you enough to recommend you to just about everybody. And in small organizations, we see it even higher because there's almost no data collection happening, or the leaders are maybe not people with leadership experience. And so it's literally just like it's internal culture is totally off the radar. And then we see it in big organizations as well, where we have this like massive data collection happening, and it's fundamentally flawed. So, and I agree, it's very much an Internet of Things type idea. I want to ask you just another quick question, which was, what was the last thing you checked out of and why? So I'll give you an example. It doesn't need to be work related, it doesn't need to be school related. But because I teach, and because I still coach here at a small Christian university here in Calgary, Ambrose University, if anybody's wondering, and if you want to cheer for us, please cheer for us. Though I don't know how loyal you might be to your NAIT group. My fiance actually is a NAIT volleyball alumni. And I only make fun of her for that sometimes. But I want you to think about something that you've checked out of and why you've checked out of it, because what we're seeing right now is a massive checkout of students where we just force them online. We didn't force them online. A situation forced them online for an extended period of time. And now students are checking out on learning. And we're doing a lot of research to try to figure out why. And we're actually finding that it might be a good thing. because the students that are checking out on learning in a formal post-secondary setting are checking into learning in ways that they're truly engaged and interested in. The last thing I checked out on just before I go to your answers is learning to ice skate. I still can't skate. I'm 6'6". It's a really long way to go if my head hits the ice and I can't get that thought out of my head. I do so many things around athletics, and I'm Canadian, and I can't, for the life of me, figure out this skating thing. And I check out of it over and over again. Every couple of years, I'm like, I'm buying skates and I'm learning how. And I can stand and I can go forward and periodically go fast and fall just as hard as I go fast. So I check out of it. And I check out of it because of fear. I check out of it because of lack of success. And I check out of it because I really just don't have a passion for it. So I'd like to hear one or two of you just share what the last thing that you checked out of was and why. Chris?
Sorry, I put my hand up there again, but if somebody else wants to speak, I can wait and let them speak instead, because I know I've already spoken to one of your questions.
Okay, I'll go to Marie.
Sure. Hey guys. So I'm one of those poor fools still stuck in Red Deer too.
Sorry.
It's okay. When I first moved here, and I've been here since 2010, I was like, this is the biggest, smallest town I've ever moved to in rural Alberta. The mindset is totally different here. It still is. It's still hard to change. It is getting slowly better though. I have noticed that. The last thing that I checked out of completely is I'm actually vice president of the Red Deer District Labor Council for Central Alberta, and I've been within this role for about 6 years now, and I'm ready to leave because the other people that are on the board, um, they are older, but the mindset is just completely, they've not changed any of their minds. They've not addressed any of the issues. And I brought up, so right now it's a completely volunteer board. Even though we have $30,000 in savings, even though we have 15 grand in an RSP for some reason, and I don't know why, and they're still refusing to talk about compensation because their mindset is a completely volunteer, like you should be doing all of this work out of the goodness of your heart. And I'm having a really hard time changing their mind because to me, I'm at a point where I'm 36, but I'm a millennial. Like I can't believe how our age group has come along. Like millennials are now in their 40s. So it's like, you guys, this volunteer mindset needs to change. Like you have to have value in your work and you have to be paid appropriately. So when you were talking about your colleague too, who was like, sorry, I can't afford to pay you right now. So, but when I can, I'll call you back. That's the mindset that I'm trying to change is like, we need to talk about compensation, ensuring people are properly paid because there's still this weird mindset of doing things out of the goodness of your heart. Like, no. Work has value. You need to be paid for that work.
Absolutely. And we see consistently in our data, a lot of times it's kind of a trickle down effect where one of the first problems we see is like, oh yeah, there's consistent conflict between these two people or between these two groups of people. And then we see, yeah, there's definitely a lack of vulnerability and authenticity being displayed there as well. And you know what's at the root of that? Compensation issues.
Of course, there's such a different mindset there. And what's so sad is that the people that are on my board are of an older generation. They're poor. Like they are retired and they're struggling and they keep complaining about being like poor seniors. And I'm like, you guys, what are we doing here? They're not connecting that. It's like an ideology that's burned into their brain and it's so hard to get them to change that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm even just interested. I had to pull them up because I wanted to see if I knew anybody on here. It tells you a lot about the mindset of an organization that's all volunteer based when they also have a sergeant at arms.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just like that's very interesting to me.
So what I think I'm going to have to do is because we recently just had after the president had been the president for like 25 years. Oh, and by the way, he saddled up to like the Liberals, and now he's on the Senate. So, bye. Um, but the people that just came in, we've got a new president, new vice president, new secretary. I think I'm going to have to go above my board and talk to them directly and say, this is why a lot of the boards across Canada are disengaging because of this issue. There's a lack of improvement in the mindset. Like there's just a lack of actually moving this forward.
Yeah. Yep, I would agree. And I would probably, I'd be really interested to see, one of the things that we connect a lot is what people say and how people behave in connection with what the actual goals and desired outcomes are.
Mm-hmm.
If those things are actually aligned, because one of our key factors is always alignment. What is it? Why is it, or why isn't it? And are we aligning or attempting to align to the things that actually help us accomplish our goals or not? And it sounds like that's probably one of the root things there as well, which is just like, if we have clear vision and goals, and those are that is the purpose of the organization, then there's generally usually an alignment problem where the things people are saying and what people are doing doesn't really line up.
Yes, I agree with that too, because they're very supportive of the United Way. But anytime I talk about, like, we have to be careful with everything that we do and all the money that we give to the United Way, like there should be a level of criticism there because of how much they pay their CEO and their board based on complete donations. Like the United Way doesn't make any money other than through donations. And they're paying their members of the board, you know, like $1 million a year with $200,000 a year in compensation in extra bonuses. So like when we're just giving them money for donations, like we have to be also critical of that and be questioning things too, like making sure the money's staying here.
Absolutely, yeah. And I
Yeah.
just want to, I'm going to go to the chat here too, just because one of the things I've heard a lot of in our work is around like wasted time in meetings. And this is also, I think it connects to what you're saying as well, just because it's in volunteer organizations. Volunteer organizations, ironically, waste some of the most time out of any of the organizations I've ever worked with. Volunteers and not-for-profits, which again is super ironic because you're not getting anything for that extra time, anything compensation-wise. And it's so one of the first organizations that we measured for reaction to meeting length and meeting time and meeting quantity, the survey data was that the meetings were a non-issue. That there, or maybe there was some situations where it could have been an email, that kind of thing. But when we put it into body language, facial recognition capture, it was like, if you actually look at how engaged people are physically and facially in meetings, it's really low. Like and whether it's on Zoom or whatever, or many other places in person, it's like, if this is your engagement level in the meeting, you have to either have less of them, make them shorter, make them more effective. Something has to change, because even though your survey data said the meetings weren't that big a problem, these are a major problem. And oftentimes it comes back to that bias and that fear and that lack of trust in the data tool, where it's like, I might not want to write down on a survey that I'm concerned about the meeting because I'm worried somehow they're going to know that it's me. But you can't hide in a meeting. Like, and don't worry, I don't take it personally, but even in 50 minutes of talking online, if you're kind of like you have that one moment where you lean back in your chair or you like get distracted, like it's fine. It's not a big deal, but you can't lie about that stuff. The disengagement through how we act is clear. And when we capture that, we can make really solid decisions on it. Chris, I'll go to you. And then as usual, in my presentation, I'm falling behind. So I'll have to rip through the last part, but I'll give you a chance here, Chris, real quick.
So I think an example of a time that I kind of really checked out was an organization I'm a part of. I'm gonna try and be a little bit more delicate with this situation, but we always go on exercises as part of our organization, and I had attempted. I guess I'll just say I'm a part-time member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and I wanted to go into the Reg Force, and I signed up for the 3 different combat arms trades, and I was told that I would not be able to go into those combat arm trades because I'm on a dosage of medication, which essentially means that I am not a high enough health standard for them. And I remember, as of now, I'm in a combat trade. So I was kind of shocked. And I was like, well, I'm in a combat trade now. So, like, what gives? Like, I can't go into the combat trade full time. And I remember just kind of really checking out on the exercise I was on. I was completing tasks, but I was just not really there, and I wasn't enjoying myself anymore. And I'm still not even to this day. But I think when you talk about that organizational structure and that culture, I think that really adds into that culture because there is this mindset within the CAF that has not changed ever, especially in regards to mental health. They say they have more supports for it, but they don't, unfortunately. And I think that's something that really got in my craw a little bit, just long and short of it.
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, thank you for your service and your attempt to give even more. And also, it brings up one of my pet peeves again. I'm envisioning a particular client where I'm sitting there asking them why process is a certain way, and the favorite answer for people who work in culture measurement is because that's how we've always done it. And it's like, okay, we're about to make a lot of money off you guys because if that's how you've decided your policies and procedures, we're going to be here for a while. So it very much is something that we'll see people check out on anytime they're trying to do something, trying to get something, whether it's a promotion, whether it's a raise, or whether it's just something simple like trying to change a logo or print something, and they don't understand why they can't or why they have to do it a certain way, and nobody can answer the why with actual well-respected data or well-respected reasoning. The rates of dropout in terms of engagement at that point are through the roof. And your example, I have no idea why that would be the case in your example. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that lack of being able to connect decision-making policies and procedures to concrete why is a huge reason why somebody gets disengaged in a culture. It happens all the time.
Mhm.
A perfect example would even be something like an event like this. If Cecile asks you to attend an event like this, and somebody asks, well, why would I have to go to this? And she's like, well, just because you have to. You're literally, even if I was the most engaging speaker, most interesting topic in the world, you're going to come to this and be like, oh, like I have no clue why I'm here. And then from
It's
the very beginning, before I even started talking, I've got to like grind it out to try to re-engage you in something because you've been front loaded with something because of lack of clarity in the why.
mhm. That's actually happening this weekend in the CAF. We have something called defense ethics we're going to this weekend. And it's never really communicated why we're doing it. I mean, if you're smart, you can figure out why you're doing it because there are problems that need to be addressed. But that nobody has that communicated to them. Um, so
I'm glad you were. I thought you were going to be like, that's actually happening right now. It's going to be like, cool. That was very forward. That's interesting. I'm going to make a note just to that, just because I'm going to want to look into it. I was talking to Cecile before I got here about the fact that I have these tangential cultural things that I want to research all the time that my team gets mad at me for. I'll just add that to that list of things that I'm interested in, but maybe distract me from our present goals that drive my team nuts.
yeah.
I've got about 5 slides in 4 minutes, so that's pretty good on my amount of time left in falling behind. But I appreciate, honestly, that I would have had less slides if I knew that it was such a engaged group, which I should have known based on the people I knew from it, and Cecile and Nikki. I should have known that I'd get more discussion than I expected. But to give you an idea on our tech, so the way that our tech actually works is we start by using a camera, to capture visual recognition of body language and facial expression. So obviously only with permission, and releases signed. That could be holding a phone up and answering questions where we read your facial response and how you literally answer the questions to get more in-depth data. It could also be integration into security hardware that's already in public use spaces where data collection is permitted. We still get releases on that, and it's only on if it's in a public place like a hotel. We work a lot in hospitality, healthcare, and education, or a school, like a university. We only collect the employees who are actually able to release that data. Then we analyze how they behave against the personality traits of the big five and the 6 dimensions of culture. We've combined that in our proprietary. We used to have 1 algorithm, now we have 7 that we use in order to analyze those behaviors. then we use those outputs of how they're connecting and leading towards or away from overall cultural health in order to help make more accurate decisions on turnover, training, that kind of thing. And the cool thing is that as we build the tech further up, remember I said that we're at about that 45% built mark, it can happen in real time. So that amorphous blob of culture, as it changes and develops and grows, we can measure it now. Not, okay, you all filled out this survey in November. Now we finally got the data back. It's February. Hopefully everything's still the same because we're going to make decisions based on that. Instead, we can actually measure it as it goes, and we can have a much easier retest, change, and really capture all the different nuances. Now, what I encourage in order to integrate a similar model into just about any setting, even in a virtual classroom kind of setting like I've done with some teacher training, is you identify some actions and statements that you want to measure. So on a video call, that could be how many times somebody leans back in the chair or leans in. Lean back being a -1. If we want to talk binary, leaning in being a +1. And we can build a database of those. And then as we build those, we connect them to align with values and goals or pinch points and challenges that we've had in the organization and reevaluate in order to actually see the culture of the space, not based off gut feeling, not based off gap analysis between my current experience and a past experience, and not based off something that might be days, weeks, months, or years old, but right now, how things are going for us. And this is something that I encourage people to just give a shot to in any one of their, yeah. I also noticed that as soon as I said that, Nikki's camera went off, rude. So that's a -1 for Nikki. But and the thing is it's aggregate data, right? We're not actually measuring the individual. So I'm not now like, oh, Nikki's bad at culture. No, it's that if we had a day where all of us, there's maybe more than 30 minutes total of camera off time combined on everybody, if the camera on or off is one of our factors, that's one of our cultural cues. It's not about whether or not one person did anything. It's always our aggregate data. And here's just a couple of our really interesting points that we've gotten in the last year. So we've worked a little bit in nursing because I'm so sad for the nurses and other healthcare workers and how they've been treated. So we started to really invest in collecting some data in nursing. 71% of the nurses that we spoke to, most of which were in Alberta, but they came from across North America, described their workplace culture as unhealthy. For any of you who know nurses, that's not surprising at all. It's probably the most polite way to describe it. And then the Alberta post-secondary students that we surveyed, using their behavior as their answers. Oh, we have an ER nurse here. Awesome. Oh, geez. Okay. In this post-secondary sector, we also had only 27% of students in Alberta feel supported by their school in post-secondary, which is a really, really big shame. And then if you go over here, this is an aggregate of a lot of our data over the pandemic. So we collected starting in November in this one larger company, so a couple different locations. Starting in November of 2020, we saw about 27 instances of disengagement per day and about 11 to 12 instances of conflict. And then we saw that slowly decrease after they started measuring behavior as their key cultural outputs instead of how people answer surveys. So we switched them over to our techniques of behavior analysis as opposed to survey data. And we saw quick decreases in 2 of their key outputs. And I just wanted to mention really quick that all of our values are also often connected with some kind of human integration. So we do a lot of focus group. We do a lot of interview stuff as well. Our tech is being built to try to integrate that. That's pretty far down the road. After you or someone you know and love gives me $2 million, we'll be able to have that in there. But that is something where we never want to lose that human connection and become totally digital. We need to have some of that human component at all times. And then just to be like the biggest hypocrite of all hypocrites, if you feel like scanning this QR code and filling out a quick survey just on your cultural experience, that would be really useful for us because we actually use survey data all the time just to guide our projects. So our survey data points us in directions. We don't trust it enough to use or present that data very often, but we do like to send send that survey data out or send this link out to get survey data on various cultures, including nursing and other healthcare stuff, so that we can get a bit of a compass or a direction point. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all your interaction, and I appreciate you giving me an extra 2 minutes of your day. I still have time if that's an option for you to chat or ask questions if you want it, but if we have to run, then we can run too.
Anybody have any questions? Comments? Chris?
What, Chris?
Sorry, I'm just bombarding you here with questions. So I have to jokingly ask you when you're coming to my organization to fix some things. But actually on a more serious basis, I'm wondering when you talk about surveys and whatnot, and I've done many of these surveys, as I'm sure you have, and I'm sure you've led lots of them. Maybe if part of the problem is that the the fact that we have to fill out bubbles for things, and the questions are very, very generic that you have to answer in surveys, and they don't really get to the root cause of issues. Maybe it would be better to make people have to write about the issue, give them an open-ended question, make them write a certain amount of words or less about a problem.
Yeah, so actually, it's a great point. And in our nurses, so we have a separate data collection, or we had a separate data collection tool that we used. And our nurses, we sent it out province-wide at one point, and it was just asking nurses to tell us their story. So like just a full anonymous dump of their story, their experience, really messy data like that. That's why a lot of people don't do it. It's really sloppy, and just, or how I would describe it, sloppy in terms of data collection, because parsing out different themes and stuff like that takes a long time. However, to your point, we get a lot of really, really rich information from it. And we had like 800 nurses fill out ours, I think, across North America, somewhere in that ballpark. And it was a lot of stories that honestly, like, I had tears in my eyes reading some of them. Like, it was really, really rich data. And I actually connected with the Minister of Health here in Alberta to inform him that we had this. He didn't care. So I have no problem telling everybody that. But I said to him that I could use this for good, or I could use this for evil. My good, it would be partnering with the government and working together to use it. And my evil would be putting it together, publishing it in spite of the lack of partnership with the government, which it looks like that's going to be the route that we go. So, but yeah, great point, and I totally agree with you. I think the reason why maybe we don't see it very much is just because it's a really tough data collection method.
Thanks for taking that question and answering it.
Yeah, Marie?
Marie, yeah.
Yeah, does your process ever involve identifying people who have made it into management positions that are probably an inappropriate personality type? Like people who maybe don't have highly developed social skills, or don't have enough empathy to really understand how to like manage a team?
Yes and no. So we try to aggregate data as much as possible, because to stay within privacy laws, and especially when we look at certain organizations that maybe especially if they're a unionized organization, they may or may not want any kind of individual identifiers. It also skews the data when we can identify individuals, because if people know they can be recognized as an individual, they behave differently. But if they can know and trust that they are not being identified as an individual, then we get more natural behavior. And yeah, like that, I agree with you, Seal. Like the self-awareness thing, the empathy thing, the willingness to be authentic and vulnerable enough to admit when they're wrong is a huge one. Accepting feedback is another huge one that we see. You think about the big five stuff that we measure. You think about openness, agreeableness, that conscientiousness, the neuroticism. Those things are all easy to identify and see. What we generally do is we can segment it based on like management or other levels of leadership. And we can say, this is where these traits are showing as the highest or the lowest. And based on our professional opinion, that's where a lot of the challenges are coming from. I guess to put it blunt, for the right price, we'll segment the data just about any way any way we can. But the challenge is when we identify individuals, it's like dropping a nuclear bomb into an organization. So we oftentimes tell them, we'll do this, but we can't be held accountable unless you're going to financially support our longitudinal follow-up, which we're happy to do, but we can't, we rarely do it unless we're going to be, unless we're hired to stick around to support that follow-up afterwards, because otherwise it's kind of like, boom, see ya. And then the experience with Boost is they screwed up everything and left. But it is possible.
Anyone else?
Cool.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ken, for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today. I sent you all in the email how to access the event, the link to Ken's LinkedIn profile. So if you want to connect, do add a personal note so he knows where you encountered him. And don't forget, Friday we have marketing plans with Dale. And next week, we've got 2 sessions on setting financial plans for your business. One on Tuesday with TD Bank and one on Thursday with Craig Elias, where he'll give you a spreadsheet to just fill in the blanks, basically, for doing the financial plans for your business. So everybody have a great week. Yeah, he's awesome. And again, thank you, Ken.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you, Ken.
Thanks,
You
Ken.
too.
That was great.
Thank you.